First of all, thank you very much for being with us today, Mr. Berners-Lee. It's a real honor to have you on this show.
My pleasure.
Let's talk about your childhood. Both your mother and father were mathematicians and computer programmers. You already mentioned that there were a lot of science discussion at home. But when did you realize that science was a vocation for you?
I think it's not so much a sudden realization as having just constantly been on that path, with sort of mathematics always being used in conversation and a very scientific sort of attitude with both my parents. I think there was no.
So you never
no
considered
question.
doing something else than science?
Not really. Because I enjoyed building things. I enjoyed electronics on one side, and at school I was good at math, and so between the two,
and
science.
Electrical trains as well.
Electric trains, yeah.
Let's begin with the year 1999, when it all began at the CERN. At that time, could we say that what you wanted to do was simply to solve a communication problem within your team at the CERN in Geneva?
Well, it wasn't really between the team. It was the problem. The frustration was that we had all these different systems which existed for people to keep track of their documents, different systems running on different computers. And so there was, it wasn't that I wanted to make another one. I realized that the problem was I wanted one, if you like, one virtual system which would include them all. And so so really I realized that it had to be something universal. It had to be very, very general design.
Yeah, and by that time you had already invented the hypertext. It was already 10 years old. Is that right?
I didn't invent hypertext.
The Enquire system.
So I had a program called Enquire, which had links. That was 10 years before, yes. So already I'd been playing with the idea of sort of note cards which would connect one to the other, and that's, although in those days in 1980 the computers, they didn't have graphics, so it was all typing and seeing these cards scroll up on the screen.
Is that true that the first killer app was a phone book?
For the web?
Yeah.
Well, the problem is, how do you get people to pick up this strange new piece of software? And it turned out that what everybody at CERN shared was they needed to access the phone book, and the phone book was stored on one computer, one on the mainframe computer, and so we put a mainframe server on it, and so the motivation for people to use the World Wide Web was just to be able to get at the phone book.
Yeah.
And once they had the web browser, then they found other things.
When did you realize that your invention was going to be big?
There was no one particular
moment.
There was the load on the first server, when I looked at the logs over the first year, went up by a factor of 10. And then the next year, the load on the number of hits on the first server went up by a factor of 10 again. And the next year it went up by a factor of 10 again.
It's logarithmic.
So logarithmic.
Scale,
so it was completely locked into a very, very mathematically exact exponential growth. So there was no one point. It was like it was like the Big Bang, but continuous.
That's a nice analogy. In your book, Weaving the Web, published in 1999, you mentioned that by 1991, several different web services were already in competition, competing against each other. Gopher, for instance, was in some way easier, you said, to program for than the www. Why do you think your system won this war?
Well, there was a point when the Gopher was a simpler system, and in fact there was you could look at the charts of the amount of traffic on the internet backbone. They measured it, and a Gopher was expanding exponentially, and web was down below here. So the web was less, and then there was a particular point when the people who ran the Gopher, the University of Minnesota, they sent around an email message to say, probably not today, and not very much, but we might possibly charge in the future. So everybody thought, oh, it's not free. We'll have to pay royalty charges. And at that point, the Gopher traffic tanked, and the World Wide Web continued to increase.
Is that what gave you the incentive to keep it free?
Well, there was a clear, in those days, there were a lot of people who would only use it if it was completely royalty free.
Mm-hmm.
People working in their garage,
Yeah.
just for, they're working for the world, they're not working for themselves, they didn't want to have to pay royalties. People working for a big company as well, if they worked on the code, the Gopher code, that could end up their company becoming liable for huge payments down the line.
Mm-hmm.
So that it became very, very important to make sure that the web was declared to be royalty free.
But it was your philosophy from the beginning to keep it the www free. You never thought about charging anyone for this?
Well, because going back to the earlier philosophy, it should be universal. That was a big ask. Say this is going to be a universal thing. You can put anything on it. So there are people. If you're asking that, you can't also ask for 2 cents per click.
Yeah. In 1999, an interview, you voiced a fear, really prophetic fear, that in the future there would be a real danger of people going all freely to one big portal. That's what you said, and all the advertising revenues going on the same one source. This would snowball into one immense place where all our needs would be fulfilled. And I quote, in a big, and that's your quote, commercial Vatican. It was in 1999. Do you think that Facebook has become this portal?
I think a lot of people, there are several large companies out there in the space, and in different countries they compete. But I think a lot of people feel that the domination of particular big monopolies is starting to really damage innovation.
Mm-hmm.
They feel that as an entrepreneur, starting a company, they can never really compete. They can't really compete on the open web. And I think people also are sad for the original spirit of the web, that everybody would have their own website. And that website would be their own complete creation, and it would stand out there on the web without an intermediate.
Do you see this as a drift from the primary philosophy of the web, the commercialization of like those services?
Yes, I think that the original philosophy of the web was decentralized.
Mm-hmm.
It was a decentralizing force, and it was enabling ad hoc, loose groups of people to do things that they could never do before. I think that's a really important part of the sort of the ethos of the web, and I think a lot of people feel that it's.
But are you personally sad about this? Do you think?
Well, I'm personally concerned about it to the point that we have we're trying to design new systems in the lab where people will be able to store their own data and control where they put their own. But control who has access to it.
But let's say for a moment that I'm the devil's advocate, and I tell you that Mark Zuckerberg has achieved some of the dreams you cherished about the user friendliness of the future web. Do you think that in some ways it has? This is true, that it's this user friendliness. It's what you envisioned for the future of the web back in the 90s.
I think that if you have a big company, a monopoly, then always you can spend a lot of time on the user interface. America Online did that when it was the monopoly provider, and a lot of people were amazed with the things that America Online did. And when the internet came along, America Online tried to pretend that the internet didn't exist, or that the internet was part of AOL, and then they realized they had to confess that actually AOL was just one part of the bigger web. I think what happens is that you can make the walled garden beautiful inside, but in the end, all of the effort you put into making the walled garden beautiful can never compete with the jungle outside of free, crazy growth.
Do you think that there's still enough jungle left to counteract these big monopolies?
I think there will be possibly a tipping point in the future when people start to really reclaim their individual voice.
But you know, in I think it's in Le Cid, you know, the play from Pierre Corneille, when Rodrigue says to the king, it's a really famous sentence. Rodrigue says, and the combat, and I quote, the combat ceased for lack of soldiers. Do you think that in the future there will be like enough people aware of these beginnings of the web to be able to philosophically counteract this monopoly type of thinking
Yes, I think
that's inside
time.
Facebook and Twitter and all those big companies?
Yes, I think because of the way people are wired. I mean, here we are, we're at the web conference in Montreal, and this is full of people. There are hundreds of people here who are all really excited about the democratizing effect of the web. And so I think a lot of people also, when they just sit down naturally, they like to operate in a world, they like to be empowered, they like to be able to connect to whoever, and that feeling, I think, is very motivating.
But what would you say is the biggest threat to the development of the web as you imagine it back in the days?
Always, ever since the beginning, it's always been, the biggest threat has always been that something controls the internet. Some government, some big company. If it gets a stranglehold on the internet, so it sees everything that goes by, it spies on you, and it starts to slow down traffic to different places. Then now we use the web so much of our lives that anybody who controls the web ends up being able to control us.
Privacy has been a great debate between specialists, and thanks to Edward Snowden, it's now part of the public debate. Do you think greater privacy online will be achieved with improved laws, or as Jeremy Zimmerman, a guy you know from La Quadrature du Cercle, said in a book a few years ago, as a result of easy-to-use cryptography apps becoming more and more widespread in the world?
I think privacy isn't just about cryptography, but for example, any web app now can do cryptography inside the web app. So you can build a web app which talks to another version of itself using crypto, because the web app stack, the web app software has got cryptographic potential now. So that's exciting, and it means that really all kinds of things can be built where by encryption is normal. Also, of course, we're moving very largely to all the links being encrypted, so moving to using HTTPS instead of HTTP. So more and more of the traffic on the web is being encrypted. So we're moving towards an encrypted world. Privacy, though, is not. We don't just need that. I think also because, for example, if you're a doctor, you end up seeing a lot of people's data. You have to have a responsibility. So also we need to have a lot of discussions about what we're allowed to use data for. So I might, as a doctor, be able to get at data when I'm saving somebody in an emergency, when I'm out there on the street with an ambulance. I may just use any technique to find out what their blood type is.
And Apple implemented it on the health kit, isn't it?
So the health kit may be part of it, but what we need to move towards is where the data is used for some things and not for others. So that it's only used for medical purposes, for example, not for checking your insurance, not for selling advertising. So it's not, privacy isn't just about locking data down with cryptography. It's about understanding, sometimes regulation, sometimes just cultural understanding about what it's appropriate to use data
But people
for.
have to talk about it. What do you think about our digital literacy? Do you think it's we have enough digital literacy right now? Because we all have like big phones, cell phones, but at the same time, it doesn't seem that our culture towards it's as developed as it should be.
I think programs like this are really, really important.
Thank you very much.
To get people always thinking, don't take it for granted. Don't just use the latest app. Think about whether it's encrypted. Think about the social, when you use the latest app. What's the social are you creating a group of bullies? Are you creating something which is useful? Could you be using this for educational purposes? Think about the social impact of what you do. Think about what's under the covers. Think about how things work when you design a social network. Think about what sort of a society your network will create.
But we give away so much, like personal data. It's not photos or pictures of our kids anymore. It's our biometric data. It's much more bigger to be breached with that data than with our credit card. Let's say, or this kind of
it's
data.
True.
Do you fear like kind of a digital 911?
I think actually we will get a tipping point, but I think people will get to the point where, as they have more and more of their very personal data is available, they will more and more realize, this is my data. So we're working on new architectures where, I have my data. When I get it from the hospital, I can store it on my data store, where I control who gets access to it. If your insurance company, you want to look at my test results? Let's talk. But by default, I get to share my data with myself. I can get to share with my family, but I control my own data. When there's so much data of different types, which out there about me, it's actually going to be very empowering for me to be able to do things with it, to help it manage my life. And when people see that power is potentially available, I think there'll be potentially a big movement, the my data movement. That's my data, I own it, I get to keep it, and I get to do things with it.
So you personally own a running app, I think that you use Moves, is that right?
I've used Moves for a while.
And,
so I've got quite
you don't fear that this data will be like breached and give to
it's a concern. It's a concern. Yes. I would much prefer. I'd like to move to something where the data is directly stored, not in the cloud, but in my cloud, in my personal cloud.
Is that true that you've been caught hacking computers back in the days in Oxford, and you've been banned from using these computers?
Now you're going back a bit. It was a very minor. So my partner in physics was the brains behind it. But all we did, we used a printer that we weren't supposed to use. Okay. But we did get banned from using the printer.
Just for using a printer?
For using the computer, yeah. We used it at a bad moment.
Hacking has become like a little bit more complex than that right now.
Just explore, yeah.
A few last questions about education, science. There's a big debate here in Quebec about the future of our education system. If you would meet our education minister, what would you say to her? What advice you'd give her about the future of our education system?
I saw two things. One really important thing that teach people to code, teach people to understand, especially women, because traditionally there's been a bias the other way. Teach your girls to code. Get them to understand, expose them to the possibility of being creative using a computer. Some will go that way, some won't. Whether or not people become computer programmers, still they have to learn about computers, because if you're a minister, if you're in Parliament, if you're a judge, if you're on a jury, you have to understand the technology, because all our lives are transacted through the technology, and so to be a citizen, you have to understand it. Yeah. So that's something that the education system, I think, needs to deliver.
You're rather a discreet person compared to other web stars or tech stars like Steve Jobs, Bill Gates. Would you like to see a movie being shot about your life?
Somebody's already made a short one.
Is that good?
But what was good about it was that the main point of the movie was to explain the need for net neutrality, which explain the threat. And so that's the difficult thing to explain to people about. So if somebody takes control of the internet, why is that bad? What could they do? So the movie explains that. That's a difficult thing to explain. So I'm really grateful for them to putting it together.
Have you seen the last Steve Jobs movie?
Yeah.
How did you find it?
Well, I didn't know. I was in the same room as Steve. I would have been really interesting to have met him.
Mhm.
He was going round a set of projects which used the Next machine, and ours was there, but he got called away and had to go somewhere else halfway through. So we almost met, and so it would have been fascinating to meet him. I can't say whether the movie is accurate. Really.
Last question: what would you like us to know about the future of the web? What do we have to what do we have to know about it for the next years?
That you have to take care of the internet. That if you can spend 95% or 99% of your life just using the web, but the other 1%, please think about protecting it. Think about looking at the legislation which is coming through. Is somebody trying to put legislation in your country or another country which is trying to take control of the web? Look at the deals with the big companies. Are they in fact starting to restrict your freedom? And if necessary, use that 1% of your time to go out and protest. Get everybody, start a movement. You need to be maybe an activist. Everybody has to. If you use that, then you have a duty also to protect it.
Care for your web, from his inventor. That's a really nice.
Look after it.
Really nice message.
Yes.
Tim Berners-Lee, thank you very much for your time, and we wish you we wish you to be there for a long time. Thank you.
Je vous en prie.
Thank you very much. Merci.